Head on over to the Buccaneers Facebook page. You can leave them in the comment section underneath our live video. And as we give people a chance to do that, we have some exciting times around Advent Health Training Center. There's players back in the building. We had arrivals for the off-season program, which it's an interesting timing because of the fact that we have a new coach, but it was a little bit of a last-minute thing to have a new coach.
Yeah.
So theoretically, the team could have started last week, but then most teams are starting next week, so we're not in this little sandwich period here.
Yeah, when you have a new head coach, you're allowed to start 2 weeks earlier. So most teams have to wait until next Monday. Like you said, we could have started on the 4th, but it was such a late thing that they just pulled it back 1 week.
Yeah,
so
players were all over the place and on vacations and still doing things.
Hard to pull it all together at once, but the transition really isn't very difficult. A lot of players that came to the podium were talking about that because Todd Bowles and all these other coaches that are either in new positions or whatever, they already know them all. They're all very familiar with everybody, so it was a pretty easy transition.
And you mentioned the podium. That is one of the benefits of having the guys back in the building, is we did have some media availability with a few different people, particularly a lot on the defensive front. We did have one offensive player, Tristan Wirfs, came to the mic, so that one was my personal favorite for the things that had nothing to do with football, where we found out he did not have Tom Brady's phone number yet. I really enjoyed that, and some good things came out of that.
He's just a naturally funny guy because he's just kind of chill.
Yeah.
Like I can still remember when he was drafted and they were asking him, there's that whole idea of this player that's just so nice and chill off the field, but they become a monster on the field. And he's like, well, no, not really.
Yep, still chill. Just happen to be really good at football.
I'm just good at
chill.
football. I don't have to get all hyped up to be good at football. So the good news it was very funny, but also the good news from his time at the podium is that he says his recovery from his ankle injury suffered right at the end of the season is going well. He didn't have to have surgery. There was some thought at the beginning that he was either gonna or not gonna have surgery depending on how it was going. So it's good news that he doesn't need surgery and everything's going fine, which is great because it's just kind of amazing how quickly Tristan Wirfs has become one of the most important players on the team.
It's amazing. Yeah, and especially we talked about how there was a point when there was so much uncertainty on the line when we talked about it from like a free agency standpoint, but we hadn't even really talked about the fact that there was some uncertainty with him even injury-wise.
But it's looking good, and that's good because he's such a key player for the Buccaneers. And really, to think about it, last year he was not only a Pro Bowler, but a first-team All-Pro. In other words, one of the 2 tackles in the entire league chosen as an All-Pro. It's really rare for a player to get that kind of honor this early in his career. It hardly ever happens. Usually, the established guys keep getting the same honors over and over again. If you look at this, these were the 5 first-team All-Pro linemen in the NFL last year. And as you can tell, you got 1 second-year player, then everybody else is well advanced in their career. And most of those guys didn't get that honor until 4 or 5, whatever years in.
Yeah, you're seeing Trent Williams and Joel Bitonio.
First time ever. And Trent Williams has been in the league for 11 years and is a fantastic player. First time he's been an All-Pro.
That's
now, a couple of these guys have done a lot, but even Jason Kelsey, who's done it 4 times, and Zach Martin, who's done it 5, it took Zach Martin 3 years before he was an All-Pro. The last time the only other time in the last 10 years that an offensive tackle has been a first-team All-Pro in one of his first 2 years was Jack Conklin of Tennessee in 2016. So it's a very rare thing for a player that young to get recognized that way, just because a lot of the guys, same thing with the Pro Bowl, a lot of the guys tend to repeat. They have the name recognition, and the voters vote for the same guys. So it really kind of is an indication of just how dominant he is to get that sort of attention this early in his career.
Okay, and then let's switch over to some of the defensive guys that took the podium. One, Joe Tryon-Shoyinka. Now that we're especially approaching the draft, this was our guy last year. He's only been here a year, and already same thing to Tristan Wirfs, a big part of this defense and this team. Yeah,
that's because at least at the moment, Jason Pierre-Paul has not re-signed with the team. I don't think necessarily that's imminent. And if that's the case, if he's not with us next year, this coming year, then most likely Joe steps into a starting role. And that's a big transition. And it's really going to matter a lot how well he performs to the Bucs' production as edge rushers, because honestly, it's not a deep position for the Bucs, especially if you don't count JPP. You have really 4 guys that played at that position last year, and one of them is Cam Gill, who only played about 100 snaps. And if you look at this here, Jason Pierre-Paul, even though he missed 5 games and still played 601 snaps, which was the second most in that group, that's 600 snaps if he's not back that have to be distributed somewhere.
It's a lot of snaps.
That's a lot of snaps. Now, Anthony Nelson really had a nice finish to his season as well, so he'll pick up some snaps presumably. But probably Joe is going to have the biggest jump in his time on the field, especially if he's the starter. And what he was talking about a little bit is that it would be helpful for him if he is put as the other starting outside linebacker, and that's his job. Because last year, they had JPP, they had Shaq, they had all the interior line guys like Ndamukong Suh, and they were trying to find ways to get Joe on the field. So they played him some at 3 technique. They even played him sometimes as a stand-up off-ball linebacker, just different ways to get him on the field without taking these other guys off. And that was rough. That was tough. Lavonte David said people didn't realize how much that Joe had on his plate last year, especially as a rookie. And he thinks allowing him to focus on one job will probably help him quite a bit.
Okay, and another guy that took to the podium was Lavonte David, our longest tenured Buccaneer, guy that's taken to the podium many a time. Do you remember
the old commercial with Derek Brooks, and they were getting on the bus, and he had him chant, "Who's your favorite player, Mr. Derek Brooks?"
Yeah. Now, do we need?
I think we need a new one.
A new one with Lavonte. Right? I would enjoy that.
At this point, what Buccaneer fan is Lavonte David not? If not their favorite player, way up there.
He should be. He's just one of the best. So what were some of the things he talked about that you thought were interesting?
Well, again, with injuries, Lavonte had a foot sprain last year, and really we knew he had a foot injury. We knew he was playing through it, but the details of it weren't really discussed very much. It was really a little bit of added information. He was talking about how he had a mid-foot sprain, and there was a possibility that it would become a full tear, and if it did become a tear, he was going to have surgery and be out 6 to 8 months. That didn't happen, fortunately.
Thank goodness.
He doesn't have to have surgery. He's recovering from it. He says he'll be fully go by the time training camp starts. But he said he estimated he was probably playing about 60%.
Wow.
At the end
Which is amazing for a guy who's been in the league as long as he has, doing everything he's asked to do, and playing at that high of a level at 60%.
Yeah, but it wasn't as high of a level as he's used to.
Right.
And one of the things he pointed out, he's like, I didn't make the splash plays, the big plays. And he said specifically tackles for loss. He said, that's my game.
Yeah.
I come downfield, I get behind the line of scrimmage, I make tackles for loss. And he's not kidding. If you look at this list, since he came into the league in 2012, he's 5th in the NFL in tackles for loss. And the reason why I put sacks on this chart is because all these other guys are pass rushers.
Right.
Sacks count as tackles for loss. And so these guys would be expected to get, if you're getting a lot of sacks, you're getting a lot of TFLs. Lavonte's sort of a different thing, a unicorn in the middle here, because he has 26 sacks, which is nice.
Right.
But he's not a pass rusher.
Nothing compared to everybody else.
He gets a lot of his tackles for loss and just tackling running backs behind the line of scrimmage and stuff like that. So really, it's a very impressive number, and he's absolutely right. But he only had, I think, 5 of them last year. He's had as high as 21 in a season.
I would say that tells you about what the rest of his career has been if he only had 5 last year and to still have those kind of numbers.
So that's good, right? Because we've all been marveling how Lavonte David is still a great player 10 years in, right? But he could really legitimately be a better player this coming season than he was last year, even though he's another year older. So that's great news for the Bucs defense.
And then our final guy to talk about that came to the podium was the only new addition to the team that took to the podium, Keon ONeal, because he had not talked to the media while signing. So this was the first time the media got a chance to hear from him. So what do you feel like we learned about this new addition?
Well, there was a couple things that drew him here. One of them, honestly, was the fact that this is pretty close to his hometown. He grew up in Sumter County, which is about 45 minutes to an hour up I-75. So he said his family was all very excited when he chose here. He says when it came down to it, when he knew all the factors in the decision that he was making, that did play a role. But also, he really, really enjoyed his meeting with Todd Bowles. Said Todd Bowles was just, he liked how he was honest. He sat him down and said, this is what we want. This is what we're going to want from you. This is what we're going to do. Period.
Yeah.
So he knows exactly what he's stepping into.
That's great.
Right? He probably doesn't know exactly what his role is because, again, he also loves how creative Todd Bowles is, especially with his safeties. So there's probably going to be some creative work mixing him in, and he's excited about that as well. But Todd Bowles was there. He liked the culture here. He feels like they've established a winning culture already, and he's stepping right into it. So I think all those factors together made it the right decision for Keon ONeal.
Yeah, and when we think about losing Jordan Whitehead, we know this was a guy that was very much the downhill safety, the big hit guy. When Keon ONeal played linebacker at one point in his career, I think it's pretty safe to say that this is a good person to have in the wake of losing Jordan Whitehead.
Yeah, and the Buccaneers know exactly what Keon ONeal can do because he played for the Falcons for his first 5 seasons. He did have a couple years in 18 and 19 when he suffered some injuries really early in the season that knocked him out. But his first 2 seasons, the Bucs were well aware of what he could do. He was really good in the box safety for the Falcons. And I don't know if you remember, but in 2016, Mike Evans against the Falcons made an amazing one-handed catch on the sideline. It actually was voted the NFL's catch of the year. And part of the reason why people thought it was a great catch is because Keon ONeal absolutely laid him out at the moment he was catching the ball, and he somehow held on. But it was such an amazing hit. And so Keon was asked, like, when you pass Mike in the hallway here, do you guys like think about that hit? And he's like, sometimes.
Occasionally.
But I mean, it was a great hit, but I think Mike won. He caught the ball.
It's true.
I think we lost the game though.
Yeah, that's not important. We don't need to talk about that.
Anyway, yes, and then Keanu went to Dallas, reunited with Robert Quinn, who had been his head, Dan Quinn, who'd been, Robert Quinn's a player.
Yeah.
Dan Quinn, who'd been his head coach in Atlanta, reunited with him and agreed to try this let's be a linebacker. And you're exactly right. The reason they thought that would work is because he had been so good and such a hard hitter around the line of scrimmage.
Yeah, okay. All right, we're going to get into some of our Facebook questions here. First one, I bet you can guess what it is.
When is Rob Gronkowski signing?
Well, it's the second one to that. It's the pairing to that, which we could probably
When
even
is
talk about.
Ndamukong Suh signing?
When is Sue re-signing, or how likely is it that we re-sign him?
Yeah, there's been no noise on this, and that's why I'll just go back to the same answer I've given for the last couple of times we've talked about it, is that I think this is all in Ndamukong Suh's court, and he has done this in the last few seasons. He's taking his time. I think he's a very methodical
very
thinker.
thoughtful.
Yeah, very thoughtful about what he wants to do. He's also got a lot of off-field interests that could easily take up all of his time if he wanted to do it and go in that direction. So I think he's still deciding what he wants to do.
Okay, all right, and our next question, of course, same thing. TJ, how
Rob
likely are we to
Gronkowski?
resign Gronk?
I think we re-sign Gronk if he decides to come back. And I think he's made it clear that he's still deciding, and that if he does come back, it'll be with the Buccaneers, obviously, because Tom Brady's back. I mean,
Right.
I think it's pretty obvious. So I would suspect that that's all a matter of Rob deciding if and when. Maybe timing's part of it.
Maybe timing is part of it.
Maybe
He just likes keeping us in suspense. You know, he worked in the WWE. He knows how to do the storytelling.
Yes,
You know, he
exactly.
knows how to get maximum
Building
return here.
suspense,
Yes. All right, our next one is from Delvin, and he said, what is the biggest position of need going into the draft?
I think there's a couple answers, and I don't want to just say tight end right away because I don't think the Buccaneers will take a tight end in the first round.
Right.
It's possible, but I doubt it. But really, from just a number standpoint, especially if Rob Gronkowski decides to retire, all you have right now is Cam Brayton and Cody McElroy.
Right, and theoretically, he didn't say in the first round, so he was just saying the biggest position of need in general. So I think it still works that this is maybe the position we need the most, but that doesn't mean it's the first round pick.
So tight end, and then I think my other answer would be the front line of the defense. Whether it be a defensive tackle, especially if Ndamukong Suh doesn't return.
Right.
Whether it be another edge rusher, because again, JPP may not be back. And even if you're excited about Anthony Nelson and Joe Tryon-Shoyinka joining Shaq Barrett in a rotation, you still probably need at least one more guy there. So if you could pick up a guy like that at the end of the first round, I think it would be very helpful for the team.
Okay, and our last one here is from Gerald, who asked, do you think we will trade out of the first round?
Well, I don't think we will, because if you take all the times we've had a first round pick, how many times have we ever traded out? I think it happened one time in Tony Dungy's era, like 1998 or something like that. Yeah, I think it was 1998. Traded back and then drafted Brian Kelly. I'm getting all the first names.
You got
Joe Kelly's a pitcher.
Yeah.
Brian Kelly is who we drafted.
Too many sports facts in your head.
So, but I can see, however, how it would be an alluring idea if the opportunity arose. Obviously, you have to have a partner that wants to do it, and probably somebody trading up into the end of the first round would be a team that's maybe looking for one of these third or fourth quarterbacks on the board, because the value of drafting your quarterback at pick 30 instead of pick 34 is that as a first round pick, they get a contract 4 years plus that option year for the team. And so to have the possibility of having that guy in his first contract for 5 years instead of 4 is worth trading up for a lot of teams. So I think it would be an idea that the Buccaneers would definitely listen to if it came up, but I wouldn't predict that it will actually happen.
All right, well, that's going to do it for us on this edition of Buccaneers Insider Live, presented by Miller Lite. And if you have more questions on the draft, hopefully we will answer some of those in our Road to the Draft segment that we do. We have one this week that we're going to shoot after this show, and then we're going to have one next week, and those are the last two. So again, if you have more topics that you want to know about in terms of the draft, check those out, and we'll see you next week.